Welcome to USCIRF Spotlight, a new series by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, where we discuss major topics and issues in the news and explore how those issues are impacting religious freedom around the globe. Here is USCIRF Director of Outreach and Policy, Dwight Bashir, leading this week's discussion.
Welcome to USCIRF Spotlight. Today we're going to talk about some recent developments related to U.S. policy toward China, and in particular, what the United States government should do with the recent designation of genocide and crimes against humanity committed against Uyghur and other Turkic Muslims in the country. We're also going to learn about how some American companies have been responsible for bringing products to the United States that have used Uyghur forced labor and what can be done about it. And finally, we're going to hear some of USCIRF's top-line policy recommendations and some thoughts on what the incoming Biden administration should be doing, as well as the international community. Now, to talk about all this, we're very fortunate to have USCIRF Commissioner Nury Turkel joining us to go deeper on these issues. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate your effort.
Thanks again. Now, Commissioner Turkel is the first Uyghur American appointed to the commission. He was appointed in May of 2020 to a 2-year term by Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi. I should also add that in September, he was named by Time magazine as one of the most influential people in the world for his tireless efforts in raising the plight of Uyghurs in China. The horrific treatment and egregious violations against Uyghurs and other religious minorities in China has been well documented for years by USCIRF, the United Nations, the State Department, human rights groups across the board. Now, Commissioner Turkel, how would you characterize the current situation for Uyghurs? And can you please provide us with a general overview of the range and kinds of abuses that they continue to face in the country to this day?
Thank you very much again. The heinous human rights abuses that the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government have been orchestrating in the Uyghur region is nothing new. But we've just seen the escalation and now at the level of genocide and crime against humanity as determined by the State Department. Specifically, the nightmare started in early 2017 with the implementation of what's called de-extremification measure that is specifically targeted to attack Uyghurs' religious and ethnic identity. It has dramatically escalated ever since. Based on various reports, there are anywhere between 2 to 3 million Uyghurs have been detained in a industrial scale concentration camps that the Chinese government has built. But based on Chinese government's own account published in the white paper, that in the last 5 years, 1.3 million Uyghurs annually gone through those so-called re-education facilities. So we're learning more about what's happening to the Uyghur people, not only in those camps, but also in the actual prison, forced labor camps, and even in the society. So with forced disappearance, forced sterilization, sexual violence, forced labor, targeted attack on Uyghur religious sites, destruction of that the same, and turning them into theme park or parking lot has been ongoing. And I am profoundly grateful to the United States government in my personal and official capacity for being the leader addressing this serious crime committed against Uyghur Muslims and others in China. And also, I am profoundly grateful for my fellow commissioners at USCIRF have been lending support as early as last June, sounding alarm that Chinese policies in the Uyghur region may amount to genocide. So tide is turning. We're making some progress, but we are still in an uphill battle against this atrocities committed in China against Uyghurs and other religious minorities.
And you mentioned that, yeah, you joined the commission in May, and then it wasn't just a month later that the commission did sound that alarm, highlighting that the measures taken by the Chinese government, including forced sterilization, as you referenced, likely met the legal criteria for genocide under international law. And just last week, as we already alluded to, January 19th, the final full day of the Trump administration, the State Department designated China's treatment of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region as genocide and crimes against humanity. Now, tell us, why is this significant now, and what steps should the incoming Biden administration take to affirm and address this designation?
Indeed, the designation was a momentous, to me personally, professionally, as an indirect victim of the ongoing genocidal policies by the Chinese government. And this is particularly significant to those Uyghurs, including our fellow Americans, who have been looking for their loved ones, sisters, brothers, mothers, and fathers. Recently, we took a position and condemned the Chinese government's sentencing of this Uyghur former doctor with American family to 20 years imprisonment. She committed no crime. She has 3 grandchildren, 2 daughters and siblings in the United States. This is just one of the many individual stories that has been looking for this kind of leadership, this kind of official determination of an actual crime committed against the Uyghurs. Every crime carries a name. So properly naming crime is non-controversial. I applaud the United States government for making this determination. This has been an ongoing process. It shows that there was a process in place, documentation, evaluation, consultation was behind the scene in the works before that announcement was made. And also this reflects an understanding that there can be genocide without mass killing. Previously, when we advocated the United States governments and our allies and partners to take a hard look at this to see if it's a genocide, the response that we get, one of the common responses was that we have not seen an evidence for mass killing. So this decision actually sets a legal precedent that genocidal actions can be labeled as such even without an evidence of mass killing. So the interesting aspect and unique aspect of China's genocide against Uyghurs involves technology, misuse of diplomatic influence, and buying silence in the weaker and developing countries. So with this decision, the United States government will not only address the ongoing atrocities, genocide, crime against humanity, but also sends a powerful message to those bad actors around the world who may be inclined to commit a similar kind of heinous acts, to persecute religious and ethnic minorities. Oftentimes, the experts, legal scholars, and various governments perceive religious persecution as a crime against humanity. As we have seen in the history, religious persecution, as the case in China, actually leads to a genocidal outcome. Actually, the most repressive forms of religious persecution gets to that country, that regime, more instability as opposed to stability that they claim to achieve. So this decision is so significant in multiple fronts, politically, societally, legally. Again, this is a bad news to the Uyghur people of a horrific situation. I hope that the Biden administration use this decision to build a multilateral support with our allies and partners. At the end of the day, this level of atrocity, this level of industrial scale oppression, repression that is affecting people around the world need to be addressed either collectively or individually by the international community.
Thank you for that. And you touched on an area there also referring to the economic angle. And I want to refer to a op-ed that you published in the New York Times last week, where you discussed a bit about your personal experience with forced labor, being born in a re-education camp while your father was in a separate labor camp. But you also discussed how products being produced in these forced labor camps eventually make their way to the United States, and that some American-based companies and businesses use, they either directly employ or source from businesses that use forced labor, Uyghur forced labor. Can you tell us a little bit about this and what has been done thus far, and what more to combat this particular phenomenon?
As I stated in my op-ed, forced labor has been a central or key component of China's campaign against Uyghurs for decades. I grew up actually witnessing Uyghur villagers being subject to forced labor, building irrigation system or picking cotton field. Actually managed, run by, owned by this entity, Xinjiang Production Construction Corp, that the United States government sanctioned last year under the Global Magnitsky Act. So the world just found out about these brutal policies in China. And to me, the Uyghur issue is no longer just a human rights concern or religious persecution concern. I would say that this is a global concern now, because China's use of forced labor have tainted or polluted the global economic system with tainted products made by modern day slaves. So when we go to the store and looking for products for personal or family use, that includes baby pajamas, beauty products. If it's made in China, the chance of these products produced by enslaved Uyghurs are pretty high, as reported in the various reported by various policy institutions, congressional organizations, or media organizations. So the evidence is overwhelming that the Chinese government has been using forced labor to pollute the global supply chain. So this is a consumer issue. This is a moral issue. This is an economic security issue, not only for the United States, but for other countries, particularly in Europe. I will mention a rather disturbing statistics reported by Center for Strategic International Studies last year, that during the period of April 2019 through April 2020, the export volume from the Uyghur region to Italy increased by nearly 200%. During the same period, the export volume from that part of the world to the United States has increased by 250%. So that shows the severity and the seriousness of the issue. So American consumers, global consumers, policymakers, particularly the business community, can no longer ignore this issue. At the end of the day, the industrialists, the business community, corporations will be responsible for either unwittingly providing the means and tools for the Chinese to intensify its religious persecution and now the genocidal policies in the Uyghur region.
You know, you touched on earlier about some of the things that the new Biden administration can do to address the genocide determination. I want to push a little bit here on some of the other tools that might be available in the arsenal, so to speak, to mitigate China's actions toward Uyghurs and other religious minorities in the country. While for example, while we've seen a welcome increase of targeted sanctions on Chinese officials responsible for these abuses over the past year or so, and other punitive measures taken by the U.S. government, we haven't necessarily seen any tangible improvements toward Uyghurs on the ground or other religious minorities. In fact, I mean, the whole point really of these kinds of targeted sanctions is to try to influence behavior by the government on the other side. I should also mention that in the past year or so, we've very much welcomed the passage of some legislation that advances accountability for some of these violations, such as the Tibet Policy and Support Act, but specifically the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, and other bills pending include the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. What would you say now to some other options, if it was possible here, that you mentioned our partners in the international community? How should the U.S. be moving forward from here in collaboration with our partners going forward to put pressure on China to get to a point where we have hope for some change on the ground?
A few thoughts on that. The decision has to be a diplomatic, political, and, if you will, legal. On the diplomatic front, United States government now has an opportunity, especially the Biden administration has an opportunity to rally support from our traditional allies and partners. They are also facing the same problem. They're just lagging behind, and they're not being able to recognize as the way that the United States has. So our partners and allies, if I can be less diplomatic, has no excuse. They have no one to blame now. They have no one to accuse of being using double standard. So the ball is in our allies and partners' court to take a similar step. They have a similar tools available, and they have also have a ways and means to legislate and put in place a mandate to address these issues, as has been done in the United States. US government has added over 50 Chinese entities to Commerce Department's entity list. And as I mentioned earlier, there was at least 2 significant announcements was made on the global Magnitsky sanctions. Some countries that we have a partnership and strategic a relationship with have similar legal tools available, so they can utilize them. And now that since the United States is not in the Human Rights Council, our partners and allies should convene, especially after the determinations made by the US government now, they have more compelling reason to convene an emergency session at the UN. We only need 16 countries to organize this kind of urgent meeting. And then 2, also goes to the issue of diplomatic concern. The international community should look at the contract that they have with Communist China, particularly for the 2022 Winter Olympics. In the face of the genocidal activities taking place, and with the US government recognizing that there is a genocide and crime against humanity has been committed in China, it will be strange, if not immoral, to have our athletes, our government officials, including those from European countries, to attend the Winter Olympics. So they should try to renegotiate. They should boycott. So that's something that can be done. We should not let the history to repeat itself. In 1936, the international community made a similar mistake. The history does not repeat itself. We allow it to repeat itself. So we have to be able to take a bold steps to address this. And economically, the various capitals, various Western democracies, particularly countries that have type of relationship that the United States has with Communist China, should look at their import-export laws to add new provisions or put new mandates that will address forced labor. Even in the United States, the existing laws and measures, legal measures, are not sufficient. That's why the US Congress is considering the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And also, societally, I think the consumers, both at home and abroad, have responsibility. If you stop buying tainted products made and exported by China, then you can at least put pressure on the businesses. The businesses have a huge role to play. They no longer can feign ignorance, as the case of Volkswagen CEO, as the case of those companies lobbying against the Forced Labor Prevention Act. So it is a matter of conscience. It is a matter of moral responsibility. It is a matter of US national security interests to tackle this issue. At the end of the day, this kind of crimes are not stopped. And those who are responsible for these crimes not to hold to account, we will see it again. Every time the international community failed to act when a religious minority faced genocide, the bad actor will get wrong idea. And those acts keep coming back. The international community failed to address the Yazidi genocide. The same thing has happened on the Rohingya case, and now we're dealing with the Uyghur genocide. So the question is, when are you going to act? When are you going to be lending your voice? When are you going to be making a conscious, principled foreign policy decisions to not only address, but to prevent this kind of atrocities happening again?
A lot of food for thought there. Thank you so much. I want to thank Commissioner Nury Turkel for his insights today. We'll have to leave it right there. You can find more of USCIRF's work on China and our latest policy recommendations on our website at www.uscirf.gov. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on USCIRF Spotlight.